All right. I said I was going to speak on the subject of leadering.
Great.
It's a good start.
I'm done. If I'm starting with leadering, don't listen to me. Don't even, if you're on YouTube, tune out. There's no point. Leadering. On the concept of leading versus shepherding, I'm actually going to change the title from leading to pastoring. And in that, I need another week of prep. The reason is that we just live in a world where I think there's been a lot of miscommunication around what pastoring is. I think there's a lot of churches where you've got like a media pastor. And I just, I've always not had that. But at the same time, you could be a pastor who's over media, but I don't think you're the media pastor. You know what I mean? That's just my thought. I'll unpack that next week because I just need another week to talk about it. The second thing is that there is crossover and bleed with some of these things. And so they need clearer definition, and I want to make sure I'm in a good place to define it for you, and I need another week to do a bit better with that so that I can really help you with it. We're going to go lots of places. We're going to ask questions whether you're even called to lead, and if that's your spiritual gifting, and do you have that, and what capacity do you lead? Does everybody lead? What's the difference between pastoring? How does that tie in with leading a vision of a church, a team? Apostle, the gifting, the apostolic gifting, is that dead? Is it still present? We're going to talk through it. So the goal is this: to help you move things and know the difference between how you keep some people healthy and how you move things, and what are the different approaches and gifts that are at work when those things happen. And we're going to go on a journey. For some of you, you're going to go, okay, I know my place, this is my gifting. And then some of you, you're going to go, I believe it's my gifting, but I'm not functioning in it. Yeah. And if I'm not functioning in it, there's probably something in me that I've got to go back and either set some values or get some healing, and we're going to move towards it. So it's going to be a great subject, but I want to do it justice, so I'm going to take one more week. So I am going to speak something though, and it's just a little something, and we can open it up for conversation. But I was speaking with someone last week, and we had a great subject, and I wanted to bring that subject to the table because I think we could all benefit from the conversation. So I was speaking to someone on the team, and we were talking about the dynamics between a spiritual change that's needed on the teams we lead and a practical change that's needed on the teams we lead. And I wanted to bring that conversation to us because I think it holds a lot of merit. I think it's super needed. And I think not navigated well, it does more damage than we actually realize. I have been in multiple scenarios where people don't know which is which and the places in that they fall in, like which one's first and which one's second. And what it does is it causes huge problems and trouble. And I would go as far as to say, even though this is a buzzword, very much so at the moment, and I think in some cases overused, is it does bring trauma. It does bring on its pointy end of the spectrum. The reason I say that, and I use that word lightly, I think by extreme definition, a light scratch is a trauma, but it's just a scratch. Losing my arm, trauma. Yeah. That's where I've gone with some things. That'll probably be a good start for you one day as well to talk through. But that being said, I think a lot of people don't navigate this well on teams, churches, ministries, and I think it can sometimes be the difference between a ministry surviving and not surviving. So I want to talk through it. So here we go. How do you know you got a spiritual problem versus a practical problem? And then how do you know which one you communicate and which one you act on? Yeah. I would say this. It is obvious that everything is spiritual. Let's start there, right? We're told through the Bible that the struggle is not, in Ephesians, the struggle is not flesh and blood, right? So it's just telling us, hey, you might be dealing with flesh and blood, like you want to give them a few, you know what I mean? And you're frustrated with them, and that's okay. Jesus was frustrated. He said more than once, how much longer must I be with these people? Yeah. Moses was frustrated. It lended him to go back to God and go, is this leadership? Right. And God's like, don't, just bring the 70 elders. Just bring the elders. Let me put a bit of what's on you in them. Okay. Pause, parentheses, little teaching moment that, You can't build a good team on skill if they don't share spirit.
Yeah, that's great.
You can't build a good team on skill if they don't share spirit. Because it was that which got the people unified. It is, in fact, a lot of what Corinthians talks to us about and challenges us on in the gifts, as well as one spirit dispensing them all, but also one spirit bringing us together. Without unity, a team just can't move. Yeah. And so you could have a whole bunch of skilled people. Real Madrid at a season had all the players in the world that you'd want to have and were missing titles. And that's because skill does not do as much as unity. And the like spirit. Right. And I would say this about spirit. People can learn your culture, but they got to catch your spirit. Yeah. Culture can be taught, but culture doesn't always sit well with people because they don't have the same spirit. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes we won't employ someone, or sometimes we won't elevate someone, or sometimes we won't, draw close to someone, or maybe choose them for a staff position or something in not our church, but in organizations, and obviously in some of our teams, I'm sure we do this too, because it would say something like they don't have our culture. But culture can be learned. The bigger question is this: do they have our spirit? Right. Yeah. If they don't have our spirit, the culture doesn't matter. Yeah. Right. The culture will be forced. They'll do it because they have to, not because they get it. Right? So little teaching moment. Spirit is more important than culture. They need to get that. And Moses, again, back to where we were at before we digress, is just, it can be frustrating leading people, right? It could be, and that's okay. But what happens quite often is we don't know the difference between if this is a spiritual problem or a practical problem. And I would say I would always start with the practical, even though the spiritual is evident, it is present, it is important. I am not lessening that if God doesn't bless it, it doesn't grow. I am not lessening that there are spiritual attacks. I'm not lessening all of that. But I hold that with the also revelation that we have been given all authority. Yeah. And I hold that if Christ is for us, who could be against us? And I hold that with the fact that we serve the Most High God. So greater is he that is within me than he that is in the world. So yes, this is spirit. I mean, it is going to happen. It is clear. The devil's not happy about us doing what we're doing. And he's going to send forces, and he is organized, and it's going to happen. So it would stand to reason that most of us would say, well, then we're going to pray. And what will happen is a lot of teams will go through something. Their attention will first go to the spiritual. They'll call a prayer meeting, and they're like, we're going to pray this thing out. Not realizing that the prayer meeting is actually causing even further problems within the teams, and I'll tell you why. I think the first premise that I would put to us is that the spiritual needs an angle. It needs a right. It needs an open door. Yeah. It needs a habit. It needs something. It needs something for you to work on. So, for example, if you are rude and horrible as a leader, then I think that that's an angle. Mm-hmm. If you are disorganized, that's an angle. Yeah. If you are, and then this could go all the way to the pointy end of the spectrum. If you're in living with a moral sin and failure, there's an angle. Yeah. And if you are just not, you've got communication problems in your church, there's an angle. Yeah. And once people start getting upset and things start getting, now gossip can creep in. You know what I mean? And now dissension can creep in, and all these spiritual things can act on what you give them. Yeah. You know what I mean? It is hard for lust to take root if eyes are guarded. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If your mind is the garden of your thoughts, you're going to get what you plan. Yeah. Yeah. And if you don't guard that, then the enemy's got space and scope. Yeah. And so it would seem logical to first go and pray, but I think it's logical to first go and tend. Yeah. First go and fix and close the angle, shut the door, practically get the things in motion that need to be there, and then do the spiritual. That's the basis, I would say, first, right? The Bible even talks about in that moment, I can't remember where in Scripture it was. It's in one of the Gospels. I think it's in Luke. And it says that, if this house is not cleaned and filled, basically that these return 7 times worse. I think when we just address the spiritual without cleaning the house and addressing the practical in our ministries, we just make it worse. And we make it worse both on a spiritual level and a practical level. I'll tell you why. Second thing is this: most of us would blame the spiritual because we don't like to take responsibility in the practical. It is spiritual because it can't be me. Rather than it's my leadership, it's the devil. It's demons. It's the spirit of Delilah and Jezebel. She's always at work. And it's Jezebel. Jezebel's the reason I can't build a team. Or you're terrible with rosters and you don't get back to people and you're not organized and you're not present and you're not giving them enough a job. You're not giving them enough work. And you keep recruiting high-skilled people, but you're not putting them in somewhere that they feel is working. Or you just rather get it done yourself because you know you can guarantee the work, but it doesn't mean that you can build a team. So the thing is that quite often I think it's arrogance to blame the spiritual without owning the practical that might have given them some space. You know what I mean? I think thirdly what it does is your team is watching you, and it's hard for them to reconcile that this is spiritual when they see practical. It's hard for them to go, oh yeah, it's a demon. It's definitely a demon. There's definitely principalities out here. They're coming up against us. That's why the rosters weren't sent out, and why you never answer my text messages, and why I can't get one-on-one time with you, and why you're not good at explaining vision, and why you don't sit there and coach me, and why you're also kind of aloof, and why you're rude. It's spiritual. I just don't think it is. No, it could be. There could be an attack on you. That happens. But what is it in you? Because I'll tell you what, the devil can definitely mess with me when my practical mentality towards what is good and celebration worthy is marred and skewed. When I run with I should be further, he's really good at reminding me how far behind I am. So even there, what value systems do we have that make us good targets? First the practical, then the spiritual. First the natural, then the supernatural. Do that first, and I'll tell you what you'll gain is this. Now, know that, remembering that these are two things that run concurrently. But own what you have to do in the physical first, and then shut the door, close the angles, address the lack, grow, own, example ownership, don't just expect it. And then you can pray the thing out. Then you can go, all those things, do those things. But why do I say this? I've just been in a few churches and a few leadership moments where, yes, it's been spiritual. It's always spiritual. The devil doesn't want you to succeed. But also it was, you didn't steward the money. And also it was, we got to fix some of our systems. So even speaking candidly, just a year ago, we went as a church through a bit of a storm, and there was a lot of things that were said, and some volunteers were like, well, is that... Ords and I never got up and said, hey church, I'm going to preach a 7-part series on how this is spiritual. And we also never went and said, hey guys, this is all spiritual. We had all of our leaders in our home, and we said, how much of what is being said have you seen so that we can fix? Here's what I can tell you. Here's what I can't tell you. I can't tell you this because I'll never speak about people. But I can tell you this. And look, I'm not saying we did it perfect. I'm not saying that we're the perfect church now. If anyone's listening that's in ministry, we're so far from it. But all I'm saying is this. It was not a moment for me to blame the devil, because that would have only given the devil better foothold. It was a moment to say, what am I not seeing? And let's just use everything, every bit of feedback as an opportunity for growth. If we can use every bit of feedback as an opportunity for growth, let's do that. Let's tie up the practical, and then let's get to the spiritual. In fact, Ords and I, while the practical was being done, we were spiritually warring and praying. Why? Because there's a time for things to do in front of people, there's a time to do things with people, and there's a time to do things with God. When it comes to the things that are spiritual, know that sometimes you got to go to your mountain first before you come back to the people. Let's not be quick to blame spiritual things as to why we're not moving. And I just want to put this out there before I open up the conversation to everybody that is still waiting for a promotion. Just quiet, letting it sink in for a sec. To everybody who's still waiting for a significant other. To everybody who's still waiting, and I'm talking about corporate promotion as well as in church. To everybody who has a theme of a team that's not growing. Like all of us, me included, my hands raised, there are themes in my leadership, otherwise I'd be where I want to be. We all got to look at this first, get good with the practical, tie up the loose ends, and then go with the spiritual. As the leader, I would say, of your own life, of your own situations, I would do them concurrently. Go up the mountain to see God and get a better view of your work. Go up the mountain, hear from God, see the work, marry the two. If you do that, I think you'll always be in a better place. Now let's play the outcome of not doing it. I think the risk of not doing it is greater than the work of doing it. The work of doing that approach can only result to good. You might say, well, people might get away with things. It's not me. It's all these things. By doing that work, you're only going to put yourself in a better place. By not doing it, if you are wrong, you're going to be left behind. So the best approach, I think, is to take the harshest of feedback and lies, look for the truth, grow from it, and then keep moving. If you're never too hinged on being great, you're okay with not being perfect. So I think that's my thought. That's my leadership thought for us to discuss today for the last 30 minutes. I wanted everybody to jump in, ask questions, I don't know, all the things. Any questions on this subject?
Can I say a scripture that popped up on this?
Yes.
It just popped in my head, but like 1 Peter 1:13 through 15, it's like, therefore gird up the loins of your mind, be sober, and rest your hope fully upon the grace that is to be brought to you in the revelation of Jesus Christ. As obedient children, not conforming yourselves to the former lusts as in your ignorance, but he who called you is holy, and also be holy in all your conduct, because it is written, be holy for I am holy. I know it can kind of a jump, but it's like that gird up the loins of your mind is literally they would tie up the loins of their cloth so they'd be ready to run physically. I just feel like it ties so well to what you're speaking of, like the physical, like in all your conduct, be holy. Like there's a holy practice that we can put, right? Like I feel that.
And I think as well, like it's this thing of like, okay, even just the practicalities of Moses walking the people out, like, he's spirit led, but he's practically implementing. He had to stand in the water. You know what I mean? He had to put his staff down. And faith and works is evidence of faith, because if you really do have faith, you'd go do it. And I think that it's just this great idea that I think sometimes what we're waiting for is just supernatural answers, because it's easier. The flesh is hard, both with its insecurities and desires to be better, as well as just work ethic. It can be hard, but and I think we've always got to, I think we've got to get better with that.
I have a question. What are some practical ways, you said the spirit is more important than culture, like what are some practical ways to catch the spirit for yourself as well as to pass it on to others?
So for me, right, like they're very similar, culture and spirit. But I think for me, what I've noticed is spirit is really about the values towards life that you have. Spirit is the values you hold towards church, faith, kingdom. And people have different values. in that, and you'll never catch the same spirit. Like when we say we're like spirited, it could be because like, yeah, man, we're both about like just we'll give it all up to do whatever for the kingdom, and we're like spirited because like we think that at the end of the day, it's not all the money I could be making in the marketplace that has drawn me into ministry. It's all the impact I could be doing in the world that's drawn me into ministry. So like it's different. But if our value systems are different, like my value system is that I want to make sure I've got a massive home in a comfortable neighborhood with all the cars and all the things, and that's what is my driver. I'm not saying that's wrong for someone. I'm just saying if that's my driver, then you and I are not going to be like spirited. And the only thing that can shift spirit is God and time, in my experience. You can't shift spirit in someone. You might be who God uses as by way of like some of your influence and some of the things that you might be living and it might be preaching. Like the amount of times that someone's come up to me and said, it's what I've seen that has changed me, not what you've said, like has been sobering, because you thought I was going to say so many, but it's more sobering than it has been many, because it's a reminder that like, honestly, you preach through your lifestyle, and that's why proximity sometimes will help someone shift their spirit. But the reality is, in my experience, both biblically, from what I see in the Bible and what I've like walked through, it's only time and God that can change someone's spirit.
Yes, yeah.
Time, because they'll come to their own revelations as they go down their own dead ends.
Right.
And God, because he's supernaturally the only one that can do it. It's a great question though. I think a lot of the time, for all those that, I don't know if you heard it, but Cole just said, how do you change someone's spirit? And the reality is you can't. And the reason I say that as well, and I want to labor on it a bit, is just, I would encourage you to comb through your team and ask, are you discipling someone? Are you trying to help someone with their character, or are you trying to change their spirit? Because you're not going to get there.
Come on.
You know what I mean? And quite often what we do is the loud person that's work gets more time than the hungry person that wants to learn. Sometimes we like the difficult person with talent than the faithful person with less. But I would rather build with the faithful person with less than the talented person with attitude. Because I'll tell you what, work ethic is better than talent. And this is what I genuinely believe this, and I'll just pause on this. You know why I like work ethic more than talent? Is because I think that God honors it. And the best talent comes from anointing, and God can anoint someone. And I would rather those that win favor with God than those that win favor with people. And so elevate those that will win favor with God. Don't elevate those that win favor with people. Those that win favor with people will bring them through the doors and take them with them. But if they win favor with God, God will bring them through the doors. And if they move on in seasons to come, they came here because of the gift. They came here because of the anointing and because of God, not because of the gifted. And if we build a church on the gifted, it is quicker, it is easier, and it has been tempting, but we've not done it because we realize through personal experience that whilst that might make your church explode, it's like one of those atomic bombs that has both an explosion and an implosion. And the implosion is always greater than the explosion.
So leadership question on practicals and pushing a new practical or addressing a couple areas, like from your experience, you know, how much time do you give a trial of like a new practical, for instance? Before you want to start a new one, or like, you know, you've talked about the whiplash thing.
I think it's okay to change. You can change systems and structures. No. If I was to say what you can change in order of how often you can change it, the top being the least, is this. 4 things that you can't change quick, that you can change in varying speeds, with the top being the least often you should change it with the, least speed.
Okay.
Vision. Vision should not change as quick, and it should not change often, preferably not at all. Direction is next. Direction should not change often, and it definitely can't change quick unless it's because you're about to hit an iceberg and nobody wants to be the Titanic. The third thing that doesn't change well but can change. It'll change often because it has to change, but shouldn't change. It can change by default, but not always by design. Default meaning people can quit, and it's structure. Structures can change. I'd put them in the moderate level. They can change because people quit. That's still going to tell you something about your org as well. It sometimes says something about the work, right? Like, not everybody wants to be a coal miner. So, like, I'm sure they've got a high rate of attrition. So it's either the work or the workplace.
Right.
And I think that structures can change fairly moderately. But the minute you move people in and out of positions too often, it's going to hurt people.
Sure. Yeah.
But what I would say is this. In the early days of anything, it's a must.
Yeah.
Why? Because the early days are volatile, but it's why I would also encourage anybody in the early days of planting a church or building is give titles very rarely.
Right.
Because they're easy to give and hard to take away.
Right.
Good.
And then the third thing that I think can change actually quite quickly and needs to change quicker, more often than not, is systems.
Sure.
Systems, I think, should change according to the fruit they bear. And I think if a system's not bearing, and I would say this, stop preaching systems as if they're going to live there forever. Don't carve your systems into tablets of stone.
Yeah.
Put your systems on whiteboards.
Wow.
Because the reality is every system should be just in the spirit of evolution and iteration, not in the spirit of like 10 commandments. You know what I mean? So one thing we say at People Church a lot is we just say we iterate. Like we iterate, and what we do at every week is we go, okay, this week we had a system for handing out Bibles. How good was that? 7 points of that system were great, 3 were not. Cool, let's change them. But if you preach systems to be as if systems are the be all and end all that stay around forever, and I think what churches often do, funnily enough, a lot of churches and organizations do, is they flip that upside down. They never change systems, rarely change structures, always change direction, and don't have a vision. And that is very detrimental.
I have a question. So, sorry, I just wanted to write this down because it's also good. Yeah, right. In leadership, how do you discern, or rather, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. Yeah, when you're leading at a capacity where you're responsible for, I guess we are like, right, people, work, how do you discern when you're navigating a tough season, what is actually you that you need to address in you, and what is like actually happening within the work? Like, how do you even trust your discern? What are almost parameters you should put in place for navigating that?
I think first of all is take note of what's happening. First of all, just make sure you take good note of what's happening and do this simple exercise that will just help you with your personal bias is always state 3 to 5, if possible, examples that you can actually say, this is what happened. Because sometimes, man, there's been so many meetings I've sat in. I say this a lot, but I've sat in so many meetings and I thought, man, we're killing it. And I look at the numbers and I'm like, oh, we're not. And then there's other times where I'm like, we're getting killed. And then I look at the numbers, I'm like, we're actually doing way better than we've ever done. And the truth is that our own emotions can play into the bias and from which we view things. Yeah. And I think the first thing is just make sure that, are you looking at what you're looking at? So write what you see and give examples for how you see it, okay? Now, from there, what I would say is ask this. Is what I'm seeing like just a constant of life? And then you can tell whether it's you or whether you're reacting to it. So, for example, is it a constant of life that there's going to be something to fix in the ministry? Yes. Is it a constant of life that people are going to have to get on the same page? Yes. Is it a constant of life that if you've got 2 big leaders in one team, they're going to fight? Yes. Is it a constant of life that when you promote someone, someone's going to be upset? Yes. Is it a constant of life that there's always going to be a complaint? Yes. Is it a constant of life that complainers are rarely contributors and contributors are rarely complainers? Yes. Like, these are constants of life, you know what I mean? So now what you can do is go, okay, what is just always there? Like, is ministry tough? Yes. Pick up your cross and follow me.
Yeah.
There is, so I always find it funny when people go, man, ever since I stopped doing ministry, it's been easier. I'm like, cool, ever since I stopped lifting weights, it's also been easier. Like, you know what I mean? It's like, ever since I got a car, it's been easier. Yes, because the bus is difficult. Like, that's what it is. But what we look at is that easier is an indication of better.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And it's not. And so when you can map that in what you're seeing, now you can ask yourself, well, then if this is a constant, is the way I'm feeling proportionate to that constant? And if it's not a constant, or you can even ask yourself, what am I doing with that constant? And you can even ask yourself, how am I bucking the constant? So we have set most of our thresholds on what we go for as a church based on not what the trend is, but what we want to see as a trend. So like there's an age-old thing that only 20% of the people in churches are in groups. And we've been like, no. One of our cultural values as a church is we live by why not. And that cultural value basically just says that we won't do what has existed. We won't lead according to precedence. We're going to call and lead according to principle. And the principle is we want to see something that's not been done before. So therefore, we're not going to build groups with the threshold of 20% because that's what everybody else is doing. Maybe we've got to go for more. And if we land at 20, good. But if we land at 80, we might have just created a rising tide that helps all the boats lift in the harbor, aka churches move with us, right?
Yeah.
And it's bold and kind of crazy to think that you might be able to do that, but also if you don't do it, not bold at all, because it is what it is. You just try. So I would say with that, Eva, like I think, try buck the trend as well, and just ask yourself, what's my response to it? What about me is fuel to this fire? How much of my responses are making this worse? How much of my mentalities are making this worse? How much of this is not a constant in life and a constant of my leadership?
Yeah, that's really
Like not all environments have these problems, and if not all environments have these problems, well then maybe it's the environment I've made, and what am I doing about it?
Yeah. It's really good. Super helpful.
I think as a leader, there's place for emotion, but you've got to make sure emotion can be stewarded and it's not stewarding you.
Yeah.
As a leader, if emotion is stewarding you and it's handling you, if emotion is your handler, then there's a problem.
Yeah, very good.
Emotion's great. It's an indicator on the dashboard of life that something needs to be addressed. But if you only work from emotion, you'll always have a lot more to address.
I have one on the back of the past few list. I guess for me, my question is really how do you prioritize the areas of the leadership that you felt like needed to be tended to? And then I thought there's like multiple areas that need to be like worked on. I know for me, like I'm very executional, and sometimes come off very like straight to the point. So I guess for me, I'm like, okay, how do you incorporate like just the areas of growth, and how do you know like, which ones to prioritize over others? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think there's two real forums that works out in. It is your personal leadership prioritization and then your corporate leadership prioritization. So what are the things in your personal manner in which you lead and your interpersonal interactions with people, and which one of your strengths and which ones of your weaknesses do you have to prioritize and get better at in any particular season? And then there is what do you prioritize as a corporate, like, hey, there are all these things to do for this X team that you run, but you don't have all the time in the day to do them, so which ones do you get done? I think you're speaking more on the interpersonal Iris, or are you speaking on both?
More in the interpersonal areas.
On the interpersonal areas, I think there's a few things. I'd make sure that my mentor and my leader have pinpointed and helped me pinpoint and locate priorities. I think that sometimes, I would start there. I think we all have a tendency of wishing our weaknesses were strengths and becoming familiar with our strengths. Familiarity even creeps in with our strengths. And we hate that we might not be good at something, so we spend all our time getting good at what we're bad at and never getting great at what we're good at. And so I think that one of the best things that you could do is start there. Second thing is, I think that there is an understanding. I would start making a list of what is boom in your life and what is bust in your life. So like, I think if, let's say, your executional strength is booming in some areas, but then it keeps busting in some areas because people come back to you and they don't like the way you spoke to them or whatever, then what I would do is work on that. And what I would just kind of think is, how do I bring a bit of that kind of finesse, relational finesse, to my tasks? And what I give myself is rules. I do things like, okay, from here on in, I'm starting off with this question, and this phrase. Yeah. And that just helps me buffer my weakness of, let's just go. So for example, a great little technique that I heard the other day that I thought was good was, okay, how do you navigate tough conversations? Because in ministry, you don't always have all the time in the world to be like, so Logan, how are ya? How's life? Production's not working right now, and we've got 5 seconds before service starts, but Lexi okay? Like, we don't have time for that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, dude, people about to walk through that door, why isn't this on? You know what I mean? So like, there's moments as well, but overall, if it's like the other parts of life where I could be just really tasky, I've learned to smile, have a joke with people, and then get into things. And in the area of tough conversations, where this concept might be kind of displayed well, is when you have a tough conversation, it's not always the time to be like, so how's life? How's everything? What's going on? Yeah. So a good way to start a tough conversation is simply, hey, thank you so much for making the time to talk with me today. I'd love to get on the same page together and see if we can resolve something. Yes. This is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it's good.
It's great.
It's just to the point, but you've just made it better. So that's a skill that I had to learn because I didn't know how to start a tough conversation. I just went straight in. Right. And I either blew people up, and then when I was told I was too harsh, then I hung out for too long and forgot to have the tough conversation. So it was like, this sucks.
Yeah, that's so real.
So having those little skills to help you with your personality propensities is a great thing to amass. And I would talk to other people that are like you that are doing it well.
Mm-hmm. I have a question. I'm thinking about, when you started Stacking today, you're sharing a bit of just like last year and the practical and the spiritual and having to navigate the two. And I like just, even as I'm transporting myself to last year, and if I were in your shoes, I would have been like practical, spiritual, like almost like jumping between the two in a way. And I guess I'm curious, like, how do you navigate that with, internally? Like, what does that look like? Because there is the human side of who we are, where we can't look at the practical. Sometimes we have to look at the spiritual in order to get through the practical. So how did you navigate some of that?
Yeah. I think I've always got a running dialogue with God, in a sense. And it's not like super spiritual, it's just very honest. Like, I'm complaining to him before I complain to anybody else. I also feel very anchored in the fact that he's got me.
Yeah.
It's gonna work, so I gotta go do my work.
That's good.
So I think, like, it was always like, all right, God, this sucks, this is happening, but off I go. Off I go to fix this, off I go to do it, off I go to own it, off I go to, like, it's just what it is. And then I also am a pretty huge proponent of, like, it's not working because of me. Mm-hmm. And that's not been healthy in some seasons, but I am very much like that. I'm more kind of going to think that way. Mm-hmm. So, like, I think if I'm thinking back to it, because I've got to go back to it, and I've never taken note of how we did it because you're in it. But I think I remember my thoughts just being, I know that there's a spiritual element to this. I know that it's spiritual too, because the fruit of what people are saying is not in line with the fruit of how God does things. So therefore, that's even clearer that it's spiritual. Mm-hmm. But, like, I know that's happening, but also, like, I can't be a fool, and I can't be the emperor who has no clothes, and I can't be, like, blind. I've got to just go do the practical. Like, I've got to go love people. I've got to go answer to things. I've got to go own things. I've got to go fix things. I've got to change things. And my thought was just simply, whatever. I've got to look at whatever is being said. I've got to see what's true. I've got to pretend it's all true. And if it's a lie, it's still a gift, because I never would have looked there. Mm-hmm. I never would have got good at it. And if it's true, I better get to it. So I don't know. It's just, I don't know. I didn't think of God forsaking us. I didn't think it was like going to end in bad things. I trusted God. I just kind of naturally just thought, let's fix it. I don't know. Yeah, I prayed to God. You know what I would say I had to go to God on is keeping my spirit healthy. That's what I had to go on. Where it felt, when in moments where something felt, after assuming it's true, doing all the things, it felt unjust. When things were malicious, that happened. I just had to keep my spirit healthy. So it was like, God, how do I work on forgiveness? How do I work on, at the end of the day, we're both your children, and even, like, that's the other revelation, is like, we're both still your children.
Yeah, right.
Like, this side and that side is still your children.
Yeah.
And so God, like, I don't want to be presumptuous. I just want you to adjudicate. I want you, God, to be the one that judges between the two. And then I made a decision too, that every time a negative thought would come in, I would pray positive prayers for that person. So I was like, if devil, you're going to try and make me hate someone, I'm going to make sure they're blessed. Like, I want them to be blessed. If they're going to say every bad comment, I'm going to pray for them more. So I felt like that was my best strategy spiritually. I was like, okay, if the devil's going to keep pitting people against me, but I keep praying God's best for them, and that changes them, then maybe he'll stop trying to fire them up against me, because I'm only going to be praying for their best agenda. I'm only going to be praying God's will over their life. So, like, make me hate people, I'm going to pray in love. Make me get angry at people and have those imaginary fights in my head. I'm going to pray. Your will be done, your kingdom come in their life as it is in heaven, Lord God. And that was another thing. I prayed the Lord's Prayer more than anything. Because what I realized is that I can pray from bias, and I can pray from arrogance, and I can pray from my side. I can pray from, oh God, help them be better. And it's like, well, what if I'm wrong? Like, what if I'm wrong? And I'm praying for them to get better. So all I knew that I could pray guaranteed was the Lord's Prayer. And I just would contextualize it. So I'd pray, let your will be done in that person's life here on earth as it is in heaven. I pray your best for their day. Give them the daily bread. Forgive them sins. Forgive my sins. And I just kept praying that over people. I kept praying blessings. I prayed according to people, the word of God for them. And then on the moments where that, my flesh and my humanity was still there, because that sounds quite, well, that's very pastoral of you. There was moments where it would just hit me out of nowhere and I'd be super angry. And I remember I had to go, God, why does this keep rising in me? And I felt like I just had to kind of go, you know what? Like, you have to live in the same grace that's been given to you. Yeah. You got to live in the same love that's been given to you. And then, you know, the result and judgment is the Lord's. And so if there's anything that'll happen, and you know what, like, to this, you know, there's been actually a few relationships now that have already been reconciled. And it's super beautiful to consider that. And it's beautiful that, like, I think prayers, they do that stuff, you know what I mean? And so I think, I don't know, try not to make enemies of people. Try know that life is long and life is short, and you're going to be mad one day with someone and think you're never going to be friends, but you will be. And you hope to be. And you might never be friends again, but you can at least hope the best for people. That's my measure of whether I'm over something. Is not have I become detached and dismissive of their best day. It's, can I want the best for them? That's when I think I'm healed in an area of relationship with someone. If I say the phrase, I don't even care what happens to them, I don't think I'm healed. I think it's more I think it would be more like God and God in me to want the best for people, not the worst. The only person I'm allowed to hate is the devil. And outside of that, I think I need to love everyone and move towards it, or at least use it as my anchor and my convictor towards my thoughts and my inner dialogues.
That's very helpful. Thank you. Just as we're talking about this, I'm like, man, that nuance between the spiritual and the practical is like, oof, it can be a lot sometimes. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, it is. And my answer might not be the best. It's just the way I navigated it. And it was the best for me. It definitely kept me in a better place. So, hey, as we close, let me just say this. I am not saying don't pray about things. I'm not saying spend less time with God. I'm just saying that the time spent in heaven should reflect on earth.
Absolutely.
All right, y'all. See you Sunday. You guys are awesome. Appreciate you all. Have a great lunch.